Welcome back to Talking Dragon Age, the show where I talk about Dragon Age. This episode is about lands beyond Thedas. Very interesting topic here. I should mention that a lot of this information is coming from the world of Thedas. I think I'll start off with the least interesting area first, and then go from there. So, in my opinion, the least interesting area is to the south. The south is largely uncharted, but past the Kokari Wilds is a place called the Sunless Lands. It's a frozen tundra supposedly inhospitable. Past them are said to be mountains covered in ice. The only ones who really have any idea what's there are the Chastened. Though the place doesn't seem habitable, the Chastened say that they do have exiles that still live there. They are called Agadi, and after having been separated for so long, have become quite different from the Chastened they were once exiled from. The two groups are not in open war. I think they mostly keep to themselves, but they clearly do not like each other. At best, they're feuding cousins, though either group would take that as a monumental insult. Next up is the east, beyond the Amaranthian Ocean. I talked about this a little in previous episodes, and it turns out that there is something over there that we know about. The place is called Amaranth. There are said to be no sentient species, which I would take to mean that there is wildlife. Explorers have gone there. Tales from Antiva describe a lush land, almost a paradise. According to legend, there have been several colonization attempts, none of which were ever heard from again, which is weird because in order to know of a lush land, the ships would have needed to go there. Maybe the original explorers went there but weren't equipped to settle it, so they returned home. As with most things like this, both in fiction and reality, the tales probably grew larger from the original telling. Personally, I would assume it is a verdant land as the tales describe, but it's far from a paradise. There's no way the explorers would have seen the entire land. At best, they saw a few miles in from the coastline before needing to pack up and return to their ships. Now, I mentioned several colonization attempts. Some were from Antiva, some were sponsored by the Free Marches. There is a hefty pirate presence in the Amaranthian Ocean and tales of large sea creatures. Those combined with the fact that the exact location of Amaranth isn't confirmed means that several of these expeditions may not have even made it to shore. Though, according to legend, at least one did. The wife of one of the would-be colonists went looking for her husband after she never heard back from his expedition. They found buildings completely abandoned. They found only one survivor, who was hiding in a cave and was terrified out of his mind. When they tried to get him to come out, he killed himself. Some suggest that if Amaranth exists at all, it's where the Qunari come from. But Brother Genetivi questions this idea. He asks, did the Qunari abandon their homes completely, leaving no trace of their former civilization? Or did they come from elsewhere, and Amaranth is simply another land with a mystery that will someday be solved by future explorers? This leads to the big one, the Northeast. I'm calling this land Kossith. That's not its official name, but it doesn't have an official name, so that's just what I'm calling it for now. I talked about this in my Qunari and Kossith video, but I'll do a quick recap here. Some stories of where the Qunari come from say they're from the east, while others say they're from the north. So let's split the difference and say northeast. Let's take a look at what Bull says.
What about Qunari who existed before the Q?
The people we came from. They're called the Kossith, but we don't use that word for the race. We came south to Thedas because the Kossith were... I don't know. We had to leave. The stories aren't clear. But I don't expect they look much like us. Whatever they are.
I am under the belief that the word Kossith doesn't refer to a race, but a group of races. Maybe it's even used like the word Qunari, like how even elves, humans, and dwarves born into the Qun are considered Qunari. Or, in Mass Effect, the Protheans conquered many races across the galaxy, and all eventually called themselves Prothean, as they were part of the Empire. So just imagine the Kossith as an empire spanning another continent up this way. It's said that the Qunari prayed to gods while they were still part of the Kossith, so we can deduce from that they are polytheistic. When the Qun was established, the Qunari fled Kossith for some unknown reason, but it's reasonable to say that they were either exiled as heretics or attempted war only to be beaten back, going into self-imposed exile rather than being wiped out or reconquered. Based on how advanced the Qunari tech is compared to the rest of Thedas, we can say with relative certainty that the Kossith are just as advanced, if not more. Now, in past videos, I've also brought up the Executors. They claim to serve a higher purpose and answer to a group known as Those Across the Sea, who are not the Qunari. I'm guessing their name Executors comes from the fact that they execute the will of those across the sea. They specifically refer to the Inquisition as solving Thedas' problems, alluding to the idea that those across the sea are a totally unique continent. Now, those across the sea may be the Kossith or the people of Amaranth, assuming Amaranth isn't part of Kossitha. They may be connected by land. If they are, I would imagine Amaranth as a peninsula extending from Kossitha, but separated by some kind of forest, mountains, or both. I'd like to talk more about Kossith society in a future video. For now, let's move on to the north. The Qunari control most of these islands up here. It is believed that Parvalan is where humans originally came from, but no one knows for certain. I'm pretty sure that there are human natives that were there when the Qunari arrived. One other race that lives there are the Vex, which were conquered by the Qun. Not much has been revealed about the Vex beyond their existence. Apparently, while they are sentient, they were primitive, though that might just be the Qunari opinion. Now, I've also talked about the pyramids of Parvalan. They are mathematically perfect and are arranged in accordance with the constellation Solium, the origin of which is unconfirmed. The codex entry for the pyramids notes that it's weird that the Parvalan natives clearly had strong technology but gave little to no resistance to the Qun. Their culture was also easily abandoned. It's theorized that because they revered tall, horned figures, they saw the Qunari as prophets. I talked a lot about that in my Qunari and Kossith video, so I'm going to move on before I get too deep. All of these islands up here have been contested between the Qunari and Tevinter for centuries. But one of note that I don't think is actually represented on the map is a large island called Parlati. Allegedly, they have a capital with significant defenses, are very cultured, and are adorned with gold and jewels. They speak an unknown language, are uninterested in contact with anyone else, and quickly expel anyone who gets too close. There are speculations as to why the Qunari haven't attacked them. It's possible that the Qunari did try to go there, but their fortresses held them back, and no one else in Thedas heard about it. There are also legends that say the Parlatians have witches that are able to cloak the island, making it near impossible to locate. In Dragon Age, that's not a very far-fetched explanation. Parlati may not even exist, but if it does, well, it seems our world just keeps getting bigger. Moving on, we're not quite done with the north. Up here we have the Dunarks. Apparently it's an enormous jungle that has not been fully explored. Besides paths being blocked by enormous trees and the like, explorers would also have to deal with wildlife, which is quite unique. A few Tevinter sailors have gone up here, and it seems accounts of just how far the jungles extend are varied. In any event, what's beyond the coast remains a mystery. It's possible it extends to the west, intersecting with our next stop on our tour de Thedas. On the coast of the Volca Sea, here on the western Anderfell, sits the trading port town of Laish. Since the Volca Sea is isolated from all other bodies of water, the only people Laish traded with are people known as the Voshai. The Voshai are a fascinating concept. They would arrive on odd-looking ships with crews of humans and dwarves. The world of Thedas says they were hostile to the people of Laish, which I wouldn't take to mean in a violent sense, as in openly attacking or anything. I believe it's more that they were just unfriendly. It says that they had no interest in learning our language for anything other than trade, and had an almost obsessive interest in acquiring lyrium. Now, obsessive is a strong word. It's also worth noting that all of the ship's captains were dwarves, indicating that dwarves either held a higher place in their society in general, or at least in trade and or their seafarers. Apparently, the Voshai suddenly stopped coming in the early Black Age, around 500 years before the Dragon Age. Laish fell into ruin without their trade, and eventually several Tevinter houses banded together to mount an expedition to find the Voshai's homeland. The ships sent were never heard from again, nor were the ships that went after them. Eventually, interest in reaching the Voshai's homeland ceased. However, recently there are reports that the Voshai have returned, bringing news of some kind of catastrophe from their homeland. Okay, where do I even start with all this information? I guess with the dwarves and lyrium trading. Okay, so we know that the deep roads may extend beyond Thedas, so it's possible that there was or is another Tig over this way. Dwarves coming to the surface was never unique to Orzammar, as evidenced by Kalrapartha in the Hissing Wastes, and who knows how many dwarves coming to the surface in ancient times. So it's not out of the question that a group of dwarves were separated from the rest of the deep roads due to the blights and cave-ins and such. Eventually, at least some of them could have migrated to the surface and joined up with a human society out there. If not that, then maybe surface dwarves of Thedas migrated out to the west at some point in the past? That seems less likely. So I'm going to go ahead with the first theory. Be sure to leave a comment if you have any other ideas. So about the obsessive interest in lyrium. I'm inclined to say it relates to the whole dwarven thing, but there are still a few lingering questions. Like, why is it such a big deal? I'm guessing they simply don't have enough lyrium where they come from, but Would that mean that there's also no Titan over this way? I have to make an episode for Lyrium. I am not looking forward to that. Anyway, their coming to Thedas is also odd. Based on how they acted towards the people of Laish, they obviously didn't want to be there. Then there's the fact that none of the Thedasian ships ever returned, but we shouldn't jump to conclusions. It's possible that there are other dangers across the sea that the Voshai know how to deal with, while we do not. But, of course, the most obvious answer is that they were captured or killed. So, they do know about Thedas, so why would they want to remain isolated? I mean, making their presence known does come with plenty of drawbacks, but they would also have a much greater supply of lyrium. So why would they seem desperate for it in Laish, but not enough so to forge greater trade agreements? I also wondered why they didn't invade and take lyrium for themselves, but that has even more drawbacks than simply announcing themselves. Now the last thing I want to talk about with the Voshai is their absence for 500 years and sudden return with tales of a massive cataclysm. That is a very deliberate choice of words. The first thing that pops into my head is some kind of magic storm. That is a plot I'm a little surprised hasn't been explored yet in Dragon Age. Now, that is just an idea, not a full theory, since there's really nothing to back it up. It could be a grand civil war, or a natural disaster, although all three of these ideas do not explain their 500-year absence. That is a long time. Think about everything that happened between the 1500s and 2000s alone. What could have kept them busy that entire time? I mean, maybe they found a huge deposit of lyrium, so they didn't need to come to Thedas anymore. That's the most rational answer I can think of. What about you guys? Can you think of anything? So anyway, are they fleeing? Wait. What if they did find an enormous amount of lyrium, mined it, but then accidentally awoke a Titan, which then went berserk even more so than the one from the Descent? Huh. Again, nothing to back that up, but it's an interesting idea. So, in any event, the world of Thedas says that they may have recently returned, but we don't know if they're straight up fleeing to Thedas, or if they're just here for a bit before returning home. Maybe a little of both. Regardless, if we're heading up to Tevinter in the next game, I would not be surprised if we also see a bit of the Anderfels. If that's the case, we should at least hear some rumors about the Voshai. Okay. Wow. Moving on, we're still not done with the West. Side note, I'd like to say that either the Voshai or the Kossith are the most interesting things we've talked about so far, but this is where the Warden went. And so by default, this is the coolest area. Although, for some reason, it's also the area we know the least about. If Alistair, Liliana, or Morrigan were romanced, then you can ask them where the Warden went.
How can the calling be stopped? Is that actually possible?
Grand Enchanter Fiona was once a warden, so I'm told, but had the taint completely drawn out of her. And there was also a warden named Avernus, who extended his life far beyond what should have been possible. So, we looked into it. We weren't going to give up without a fight. And that's when we found a rumor that meant going deep into the West. It wasn't much, but we've done more with less. My love will find a way. I'm certain of it.
The way you talk about her, I'm surprised you aren't still together.
Oh, there was a discussion, believe me. Someone had to look into the rumors about Corypheus. We didn't know what was involved at the time. She was going to stay to help, but we had a lead that couldn't wait. One of us had to go. And when I'm done here, we'll be together again. Forever this time.
Liliana and Morrigan say pretty much the same thing as Alistair. The main difference is that in the Alistair version, he says that they found the lead together. In the Morrigan version, she says that she was the one who found it. Liliana doesn't really comment about the source, just that it took her to the West.
So, we know it is possible. Indeed, 'twas I who found the lead my love now follows in the Western lands.
Her quest took her far to the west, to lands that have never known the blight.
All of this interests me, but Alistair specifically says that the lead they had simply couldn't wait. What could that possibly be? And Liliana mentions that it has never known the blight. Huh. The only thing we know to be in the West are the Voshai. Now, I'm tempted to make a joke about the Warden being the cause of the Voshai's disaster, but come on, the Warden isn't Hawk, right? In all seriousness, the Cataclysm may be what got the Warden's attention in the first place. That would explain why it couldn't wait. Besides that, we should take a look at the borders of the map. Okay, so down south is practically impossible to go through. Even if we had to get over here, we'd be better off circling around the Sea of Ash. But right to the north is a mountain range, which is apparently largely uncharted. Have you ever tried to go through mountains without an obvious path or road? You may as well be walking to Mordor. Now, I can totally buy that the Warden did go through the mountains, but I'd say it's equally as likely that he went across the Volga Sea. Now, none of the other ships that went that way have ever returned. However, if Liliana was romanced, the Trespasser epilogue says that the Warden has returned. So, if the Warden went across the Volga Sea, there are two main possibilities. One is that the Voshai are on the north side, and the Warden stayed to the south. Or, the Warden accomplished what no one else did and made it to the Voshai homeland and returned. If he or she did actually go there just after the Cataclysm, that might explain how they were able to avoid the same fate as those who went before. With all that said, we still don't have enough information to establish a strong theory. So with that, I think I'm finally ready to wrap this up. Man, this episode was a lot of fun coupled with a lot of headaches. Actually, that's pretty much all of Dragon Age, isn't it? Okay, well, that's it for now, guys. Be sure to leave a comment, and remember, Tala Nadas.